What were we talking about? Ricardo? Corn laws. We were looking at this whole idea of different capital labor ratios, and we were starting to do a numerical example. This illustrates several things about Ricardo's value theory. And so we're going to continue with that example. So how did it start out? Remember, there were two different industries, and how did they differ? So there were these two different industries that had different capital labor ratios. So this has a low capital labor ratio. This has a high capital labor ratio. This one went over 2 years, so we had 150L, 50C, 150L, 50C in the 2 years. This was a 4-year process. So it was 25L and 75C in each year. And then we wanted to look at some issues. So we're going to look at two different cases. Case one is when the wage equals one, I'll use dollars, but whatever unit it wasn't dollars, obviously, Ricardo was right, an approximate 50%. Then we're going to do case two, where W is going to be 2 units of whatever the unit of the count is. We'll just call it dollars. And the profit rate is 10%. So this reflects, and we'll show this later. We haven't actually demonstrated this is true for Ricardo. This reflects that Ricardo believes, we'll show this later, and we will show that wage and profit are inversely related. Basically, there's a pool of profit. If wages get more, profit gets less. There's a pool of stuff left over, and it's just divided. The shares are divided between those two groups. And so one group gets more than the other group gets less. We'll show that formula later. We'll just assume it for the moment. So we really just want to work out the cost per unit in the two cases and then analyze. When we move from here to here, what kinds of changes in prices, then we'll draw some broad conclusions from the example. And it's the broad conclusion I'm most interested in. So this is going to be a long table, so leave some room. It's going to have 5 columns and 3 or 4 rows. So we're going to have two different industries, A and B. Then we'll have labor cost. One, cost of machinery. That's 2. The profit cost. 3. The total cost. 4. And the cost per unit. So what's the labor cost for A? What's the wage? How many hours for A? It's 300 hours of labor, 100 hours of labor. Right? So A, the cost is 100.
Are you doing total per year?
This is total. This is the total cost. So we're looking at this whole, it takes 4 years to produce one good. They're slow in these days. Or it takes 2 years to produce one good. They're not able to produce a car. Now, the cost of machinery, I'm going to have to explain in a minute. But this is going to be 914.08, and this is going to be 187.50. And let me derive the 187.50 just so you see how it works. So what's the cost of machinery in the first year? I'm going to calculate this number. This number right here, sorry. This is a 2-year process, right? So we're going to add up the cost over 2 years. So the cost of machinery in year 1, as we're looking at the cost of machinery, is the 50 that you use. You use 50 hours of that machine the first year, right? Because this is 300L, 100C. Then you have to add in, the profit rate is 50%, the profit on that capital. So this is the cost of capital in year 1. And that's 75.
What was the first term?
This is just there was 100 units of capital, use 50 per year. And remember, this is embodied labor. So this is 50 hours of labor. And that costs $50 because the wage is 1. In case 2, it'll be $100 because the wage will be 2. So this is just the value of that machinery, plus the profit that you should earn.
Now this profit on capital, that will end up also being totaled in the final profits of the capitalists.
He double adds things. This is not the way we are doing present value formula. This is the way Ricardo does it. So now this year 2 is weird. Well, let's look at it. So year 2, you have, again, $50 plus 1/2 of 50. So that's the year 2 profit. And you have to earn profit on what's tied up from the year before. So this is going to be $75 plus 37.50. Then you add these together, this plus this, and you get 187. So it's just a compound cost. You're just compounding by the profit rate. I haven't thought about it. It doesn't seem to me like you should add these together. It seems like this accounts for the carry forward already. That's how Ricardo did it. These are his numbers. Okay, now this number is 3 equals the profit rate times 1 plus 2. So if I add this and this together, I get 487.50, and then I take half of that and I get the profit cost. So this is 243.75, and this is 507.04. So we add that to that, or have them and then add them either way. Then the total cost is 1 plus 2 plus 3. So this is 1521.12. And this is 731.25. And you remember how many units this produces? I forgot to tell you that. 100. Is that 100? This is two different ways of producing 100 units of a good. One's capital intensive, one's labor intensive. So the cost per unit, there's 100 units here. This is 1521, and this one's 731. Time of year. And if you actually have like binder paper, you don't end up going like that. I'll do this one. So this was W equals 1, pi equals 1/2. This is W equals 2, pi equals 0.10. 10%. Without going through all the calculations, 200 for A, 600 for B, because it's $2 now. This would be 765, 78, 231.
If machinery costs are the same, why are the numbers different?
They're not, because we've doubled the cost.
Oh, with wages.
Right,
Oh,
because it's
so-
embodied labor.
Oh,
But the profit rate's different.
oh.
So this is,
So the cost of wages includes the wages that were paid to make those machines?
exactly,
Okay.
exactly. So that number is 100 plus 10 is 110. And it is 100 plus 10 plus 0.10 times 110, which is 121. And that's a unit 2.
All right.
I'm not showing these because you have to do it for 4 different years.
Yeah.
And you just keep compounding. I did it all with algebra here if anyone really wants it. A nice, real short, tight way, but I don't think it makes a lot of sense. You get 195 times 75 over 16 is the answer. Okay. Never write them. So total cost, 1062.36 versus 83.10. That's not right. 914.10. So now the unit cost is 1062 and 9. I think it's 14. Oh, 14, yeah, gosh. Couldn't read my writing, I was panicking. Oh, is it? Okay, lots of numbers. What do they mean? Catch up first, and then I'll tell you. Smith, one purpose here. Smith had said, look, everything depends upon labor. You have a labor theory of value. Labor is a fundamental thing. Just add up the labor, you get value. So if you were to raise the wage rate, what should happen to the price of all goods? They should all go up. The Ricardo says, no, look what happened. Price of this good actually fell even though the wage went up. So it's not true that when you increase the wage, you increase the price of all goods. One good actually dropped. Let me list all these. So here's what we learned. So there's 4 points that come out of this. So the purpose was so you'd understand these points. This is what I care about. These 4 points. The first is that a change in the wage rate changes the relative prices. Under Smith's adding up theory, that couldn't happen. The relative prices don't change when the wage changes. Here, the relative price is almost 2 to 1. It's even over. This is more than twice this. Here, it's about 1 to 1. So a change in the wage rate does not leave relative prices unchanged, according to Ricardo. It changes relative prices. And that's contrary to what Smith had asserted. And this all comes down to this profit rate, wage rate, negative relationship, but nevertheless. So he rejects Smith's claim that an increase in the price of corn or the wage causes all prices to go up. It didn't. One price actually went down. In this example, the price of A goes down. It's the same as good. The price with production process A goes down. Is A capital or labor intensity?
Capital.
Capital. The wage rate went up, but the capital cost, because the profit rate went from 50 to 10, it's the profit rate that's dragging this. This is a capital intensive industry. And so it's that drop in the profit rate that's doing all the work here. Three, so long as profit is greater than 0, the price of A is greater than the price of B because the capital labor is higher. So this is his idea that when there's an average capital labor ratio here. What would the average economy-wide capital ratio be? 1 was 3 to 8, it'd be like 1 to 1 here. Because one's 3 to 1, one's 1 to 3. They both produce 100 units, so the weighted average of those is going to be 1 to 1. When you go up to a higher capital labor, that pulls the price up. When you go down to lower capital labor, that pulls the price down from average. So the deviation's in the direction of the deviation of the capital labor from average. False start. Okay, no question. And what should I do for? Price does not equal a constant times that. Not enough for it. Price does not equal a constant times embodied labor. They both have the same embodied labor, which is 400. One's more capital intensive, one's more labor intensive, but for him there's the same amount of embodied labor, and yet you have different prices. So it's just not the case that you can take some constant times the amount of labor and get the prices. And that's going to be a problem people try to solve and they never do. It's called the transformation problem, and they never quite actually solve it. He didn't think that was a problem for the labor theory of value. He just thought it showed how complicated the world was, and then how smart he was to uncover it. So these are just rules that's how it worked. When K of L is bigger than average, Marx isn't going to like this, because when K of L differs from average, you don't get this result. So Marx is going to argue there's always a tendency for all capital labor ratios to equalize. Then you get that this works. But we don't think they equalize, actually. But if they were, Marx would be right. But we'll come to that argument later. But for now, this sort of undermines the labor theory of value a little bit, because you start realizing it's not some simple relationship between embodied labor and output prices. It's some complicated relationship. And you start to suspect maybe it's not right from this. But Ricardo's not. He's saying it's just complicated. It's obviously right. He doesn't sound like the kind of guy you argue with much. So, like I said last time, I was going to skip this example because there's a lot of numbers. It's just a short bottom line, and I'm not sure the significance of the bottom line really impacts you the way I'd like it to. There it is. These are the main points. This whole capital labor ratio idea is really important for Marx, so I thought we needed to go through it. Otherwise, we won't really understand some of the things later. And this notion of how embodied labor and prices are it's some complicated relationship. It's not this simple idea that Smith had, where you can just figure it out. Okay, let's go on to his next theory. This is more numbers. This is the most number-intensive thing. It's the only. Oh, there's one other day we do some numbers, and that's when we do marginal utility. This is the most number-intensive day we'll have. So that shows Ricardo sort of his approach to things was to make up these examples and use this deductive, theoretical-based make up examples, see what they tell you about the world, and then go see if the world looks like that. So we're seeing this deductive reasoning expressed, and that's part of the reason we're going through this too, is to sort of show you Ricardo's analytical technique. Okay, rent. So this is a time when, as I said last time, the Napoleonic Wars are ending. There's a threat of cheap grain from France. And Ricardo's really worried about what that's going to do. The landlords are really worried, so they get corn laws put in place to protect the price of corn from this cheap inflow of foreign corn from France. They don't want their prices undercut, so they put in these corn laws. Then there's an extensive debate on this issue, and this theory of rent comes out of 4 pamphlets in 1815 by West, Ricardo, Malthus, and Torrens. And Ricardo's is the one that's sort of the most important out of that. So we want to look at this whole question of how are rents determined? How do they affect the distribution of income and capital accumulation? And Ricardo is going to argue that when rents go up, it lowers the profit rate, lowers capital accumulation, and makes us worse off. So we shouldn't have corn laws. So he's going to say that there's 2 interests. The business interest doesn't want the corn laws because they realize that it raises a subsistence wage, because the amount they have to pay their labor then goes up, and that makes them less competitive on foreign markets, is the argument. So if we have to pay more for the corn, we're going to have to pay our labor more. We're not going to be able to sell our goods for it anymore. We'll be less competitive, and that will hurt the nation. So that was the business argument against the corn laws. The landlords are saying just the opposite. Remember, Malthus said, if we don't have these darn things, we're going to end up in big depressions. We need someone to go out right now. GDP was negative in the third quarter. If those landlords just would have done their job and consumed a lot of goods and services, then the third quarter GDP wouldn't have been negative like we saw. We can all blame it on the housing sector and the landlords who did a good job to maintain the economy. In case you don't know, GDP for the third quarter was negative. Now it's 0.3%. So that's the debate. So rent to Ricardo is a part of the produce of earth. Paid to landlord for the use of the land. Very simple. And then he modified it later to include basically fixed improvements, long-term investments that would increase the productivity of the land. So if you put a windmill in or something like that, that would be a fixed asset that would be part of the land. So he adds fixed assets. And then we're going to look at two types of margins. So we're going to first, we see sort of the first systematic marginal thinking here. He says there's two kinds of margins to worry about, the intensive margin and the extensive margin. And both of these margins give us rent. The intensive margin is when you use an existing plot of land more intensively. So you keep adding more and more inputs to the same quantity of land, and he recognizes diminishing returns. So one important contribution for Ricardo is this idea of diminishing returns. As we add fixed amounts of inputs to the same unit of land, each incremental input will give us less and less output. And then we also have the extensive margin, where we don't take the existing land and work it more intensively, we bring more marginal lands into production. So where I grew up, as you move across I-5, it's hard to get water, and the land isn't as good. And so the further you move away from the river in I-5, the worse the land gets. And so as you expand out of these other lands, it takes more fertilizer and more cost, and it's harder to get water, and it's just not as good. So it's more costly to raise stuff. So this is the idea. There's land of first-degree fertility, second-degree fertility, third-degree fertility. And as the economy grows, we keep bringing these more and more marginal lands into production. And that means at some point, we're not going to be able to increase output very much, and we're going to along with stationary state. But we'll get to that.
What was the first margin?
We'll write them all down. Extensive and the intensive. So extensive is bring more land in. Intensive is just what it says. The same land more intensively. So you put more labor, more fertilizer, more seed, more people, more equipment, and you try to get more out of that one piece of land. That's the intensive margin. And that's subject to diminishing returns. And there's the extensive margin, and that's also subject to diminishing returns. And this is diminishing returns that generate rents. We'll do this. So my notes have this. That's the extensive margin in this other piece of land. Do I need to write definitions of extensive or intensive? You got it? Extensive, rent from bringing more marginal land into use. Intensive, it's the rent from more intensive. Okay, so let's illustrate the extensive margin. We're going to have 4 degrees of fertility, A, B, C, and D. these are different plots of land. This is the extensive margin. All have $10 in inputs. Oh, I should have left room here. Over here we're going to have the prices. And the prices, well, let me first put another value here. With $10 of inputs, this piece of land gives you 20 units of output. It's the highest degree of fertility. The same $10 of inputs only gives you 15. 10 and 5. So this is output from $10 of inputs. Output from $10 worth of inputs. It's important that the inputs are the same. Now, what's the minimum price we need to bring this land into production? If the price of corn is 25 cents, how much can they sell us for? $5. What's it cost them to produce it? So they don't want to produce. So, but as soon as the price hits 0.50, the rent in this case will be 0. This land won't be in production, and it's because the costs just equal the price. There's nothing left over for rent. Now population begins growing. Demand begins growing. So we have to bring in more land into production. As demand goes up, what happens to the price? It's going to go up. At what price will this land come into production? The answer is 2/3, right? Because 2/3 of 15 is 10. So when the price hits 2/3, 0.67, you know, I really don't need this line here. Get in my way. 0.50. And the price is 0.67. This land will come in, but it'll be 0 rent because, and these lands will still be out of production. But let's look at this one. What's the revenue there? That's 20 times 2/3. 40/3. 3 into 40 is 1. 1 left over. 10/3 is 13.33. What are the costs? So what's left over? That's the rent. So when this second degree of fertility comes in, the price has to rise enough to compensate, to make it worthwhile. When the price goes up, rents accrue to the land of first degree fertility. I keep saying utility, fertility. Okay, what do we need now? The economy keeps growing. This. And what do we need to get this land into production? $1. At $1, what's the rent here? 10. What's the rent here? 5. Ones are so easy. And here? 0. And this land is still sitting idle. It's not worthwhile to use it. And then finally, how much? $2.
So the fact that supply is increasing doesn't make the prices go down?
No, it's the minimum price to bring it into production.
Okay.
The demand's going up. There is a supply curve. If you want to think about it in modern terms, it's just the demand's going up.
Oh.
And we're bringing more and more land into production.
Okay.
When you do that, we would say a surplus accrues to these original factors. of that amount.
Okay.
So we're rarely calculating that surplus in that way. So how much rent here?
30.
30. I'm going with that. 20. 10. And 0. And the next unit of land is just a piece of junk. So you're done. The economy's not going to be able to grow much further than that. And that'll be Ricardo's stationary state. We'll come to that a little later. We're just trying to illustrate a rent. But see the diminishing marginal productivity idea? It's really expressed well and expressed strongly, and it really changes the way people think about these. So this is the returns to a fixed factor. The fixed factor here is land, and we're adding other units to it. And as you do that, you get diminishing returns. So this is just that Y is F of K and L. You fix the capital stock and keep adding more and more labor, you get diminishing marginal profit. That's what we're showing. So it's the real first clear expression of that sort of diminishing marginal profit. Okay, the next one takes a bunch of different panels, and it's a little harder. Now we're going to do the intensive margin. See how that works.
What was the definition of the intensive margin?
Using an existing piece of land more intensively. So we're going to add more and more inputs to the same piece of land. I'm just going to do grade A, B, and C, just 3 of them. And they're each one about this size. So it's going to be a bunch of different tables, sorry. So this is land of grade A. Price, input, output, marginal output, and rent. And the price will go from 0.50, same price as 6.7, 1.0, 2.0. Then we're going to have the same thing for grade B. And then one more for grade C. P. This is grade C. Output. Marginal output. Rent. So we start off tiny with a tiny economy. And we're using $10 of inputs here. We're getting 20 in output. The marginal output is 20. Went from 0 to 20. 0.50. And the rent is what? We're making $10 and $0. Now demand goes up. And the price goes up to 0.67. Two things happen. It's worthwhile to add another $10. This is total inputs. we're adding $10. We're going to do these in increments of $10. Output then becomes 35. The marginal output is what? 15. So we're seeing diminishing returns to inputs. So there's diminishing marginal returns here. Just like there was on the extensive margin, we're modeling that on the intensive margin as well. What's total revenue? 70/3. 2/3 times 35. That's 23 1/3. You divide by 3. What's the cost? 20. So what's the rent? 3 1/3. So the rent here is 3.33. Where's the rent accruing? Where are you getting the rent? It's coming from his first factors. It only takes 50 cents to make this worthwhile, but you're getting paid an extra 17 cents. 16 2/3 times these 20 units. That's that extra 16 cents you're getting. This is 16 2/3 extra cents. 16 2/3 times that 20 is where that 333 is coming from. You're getting more than you need to get for these 20 units.
So in actuality, that price that says 0.67 is actually 0.6667 cents.
Yeah. But our unit of account isn't infinitely visible, so I had to round. This didn't pay. This doesn't pay at all. Input, output, marginal. At 50 cents, this is that same plot B as before. It doesn't pay. Because when you put the first $10 into this land, all you get out of it is 15 units. So the marginal return here is just 15. And the rent is 0. I think I lost some here. These lines are...
So we rate B means we don't use the first plot of, we don't have the first plot of land. Is that?
No, we're using both now.
Uh-huh.
So this land has $20 worth of inputs on it and earns $3.33 in rent.
Yeah.
This one has $10 worth of inputs and earns no rent. And this land, the first $10 that you put into this land only gives you 10 units because it's less marginal. So the first $10 here gives you 20. The first $10 here gives you 15. This is just like our last case.
Okay.
These are those numbers across the top. And the first unit here only gives you 10.
Oh, it's based on a level of intensity.
Right, so this is a different degree of fertility. So it's 6 at 2/3 of this, you're only going to make $6.66. It costs you $10.
Oh.
It's not worth it to put this land into production yet, because you're only going to get 10 units. I should have said that. These are the same numbers across the top for what gives you that first. And then we're going to use it more intensively. So we've got two different diminishing marginal returns. One is on the extensive margin, and one is on the intensive margin.
Okay.
So demand, now you see what's happening. Demand goes up again. It's worthwhile to put another $10 into this plot of land. We're just illustrating for $10 increments. That gives you 45 The marginal return is only 10. But what's your rent here on this land? What's your revenue? 45? Right? Yeah, it's 15. Your costs are 30, so your rent is 15. Where does that rent come from?
The leftover.
How much rent do you earn on the first 20 units? This is $10, because you make 20 and it costs you 10. So there's $10 worth of rent. And where do you get the other rent? Yeah. It gives you 15 extra units. It costs you $10. You make $15, so there's 5 rent there. So there's $10 rent accruing to the first units, so the total rent is 15. What about here? Well, this goes down to 10. When you increase this to 20, excuse me, that's the margin. This goes to 25. The margin is 10. So how much rent do you earn on the second plot of land? $5. And it's worthwhile to bring this into production now, right? So you'll get $10 of inputs, will give you 10 output, marginal is 10, and the rent is 0. Demand goes up further. We use this more intensively, another 10 here. We only get 50, extra 5 units. Those extra 5 are worth it because you make $2 on the 5 units is $10. It covers your costs. So there's no rent on the marginal units ever. But you're going to earn rent on everything that comes before that. You're going to make $30 here because you get $40, only cost you 10. You're going to get rent here of 15, another $20, and so on. So it's, was it 60? Yeah. This is $60 in rent from the previous factor. What about here? How much rent? Making 60, yeah, 30. Jumps way up. And here, 20, 15, 5. What's the rent? 20 times 2 to 30, 10, yeah. And if we had plot D, what would happen there? We just have one line with the 5 units and there'd be no rent on it. So I have an uncle who has a plot of land in Butte Basin, it's called, in California. It's in the Sutter Bypass. And it has 8 feet of really nice topsoil. Every year it floods and does new topsoil, and it's really, you don't have to fertilize it much. There's clay 8 feet below it. So the water, all he has to do is just water at the ends and let the water soak out from the bottom. So the irrigation costs are almost nothing, and it's got less fertilizer costs. So his costs are lower than everyone else's. So his costs per units are 50 cents, and everyone else has to, it costs them $1 because they're less productive. He would earn 50 cents rent on every unit that he sold. So it's when you're more productive than the other units, you earn rent. And that's this concept. That's all that's going on here. is that when you bring the more marginal units into production, the price has to go up. And that makes rent accrue to the more efficient units that came before it. So when you're a laborer and you can work faster than everyone else, you only get paid the marginal profit of the last unit. So you get rents. Anyway, there was a question somewhere.
Oh, yeah, you were mentioning that place in California. Do you know what area the state it was in?
Yeah, it's Butte Basin. It's right by the Sutter Buttes between Williams and Yuba City.
Oh, okay, so because of the flooding from Sacramento.
Yeah, it's a Butte. It's a Sutter bypass. It's called. It captures all the bypass from Sacramento to Feather River. It's actually Feather.
What was that last thing you said about the laborers being more productive? They don't get more money, they just get the marginal product. Well, you just mentioned something about laborers being more productive.
Right, the more productive ones get their rents relative to the less productive. So,
But laborers don't earn rent.
well, they do. We're going to extend this concept of rent to everyone.
Oh, okay.
So we're going to say, what I'm doing now is extending the concept of rent to say that it accrues to more than just land. So that if you're a more productive professional basketball player than someone else and you earn more money than average, then that extra is going to be considered rent.
Oh.
That extra return over and above the average would be the rent.
All right.
You're earning on that fact. So whenever you have an increase in productivity relative to everyone else, so that's a situation in which rents. So here's the conclusion that we get out of this. It's obvious then that as the price of corn goes up, what happens to rent? It goes up, right? This is the price of corn. As it went up, what happened to rent? It went up. So what should happen to profit according to Ricardo? They're inversely related. So actually this is going to go down. I'll show this next.
Okay.
We haven't shown this yet, so you shouldn't actually know that. Ricardo thought that profit would go down, as I will show next. That leads to low growth. So that low growth means he opposes corn loans. He was in bed, I thought. So he opposes the corn laws.
So does Ricardo ever talk about rent-seeking behavior and what that's all about?
That's later on.
Okay. Yeah.
The book does the graph of this in a different way. I found their graph confusing because it looks at total product rather than marginal product. So I'm going to do it a different way, only because I think it's a lot easier to see the points I want you to see. So what we're going to look at here, this is the capital labor ratio. And this is the marginal product, say bushels. Bushels of corn. As economies grow, he's thinking of capital accumulating. So he's thinking of K over L going up as economies grow. And as that happens, you get diminishing marginal productivity. So this is the marginal product. And it's saying that as you get more, as you grow bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, keep adding more and more capital to the fixed labor factor, or as long as this is growing faster than this, it's just the ratio that matters. Our capital labor ratio today must be higher than it was in 1400, don't you think? Probably so. So he's thinking capital labor ratio is going to grow over time, but he's probably wrong about what happens to productivity, and we'll come to that part later. This is what he thinks. This is based on this kind of thinking. As you grow, productivity falls at the margin. So marginal productivity is going down. Now we have another wage. This is supposed to be horizontal. Imagine that it is, because it doesn't matter. I'll actually do it one more time. Well, sort of. It's all a matter of scale. If you made that small enough, it would look perfectly straight. You take a cue ball off a pool table and blow it up to the size of the Earth, you have way bigger mountains and valleys of the Earth. So if you just bring this down small enough, this will look perfectly straight. Just a scale. So this is the subsistence wage. And let's suppose the price of corn is here. Then it pays to use this much capital. This is wages. This thing, if you look at it closely. This part turns out to be profit, and this part turns out to be rent. This is the price that just brings these factors, it just pays to bring these factors into production. Everything before that earns rent. That's what we were just doing. Sure.
So that,
Go ahead.
that price of corn, is that like a natural price?
That's just the market price. He doesn't really say how it's set. That's the market price.
Okay.
What I want to show is fairly simple. Now, this is just the price. We're going to, how do we do this? Let's suppose the subsistence wage goes up, all else equal, for some reason. That's going to raise this line up, right? So if the wage for subsistence goes up, what happens to wages? They go up. And what happens to profit? It goes down. So this shows that W and pi are inversely related. That's what we assumed in that one example we did earlier. In the very first example today, we made that assumption. There's just some fixed surplus here. This is the total surplus. This whole amount here is the total surplus to be split up. When you raise the wage, more of it goes here and less of it goes here. There's a little bit of a complication because this number might change, but it doesn't change fundamentally, so I'm just going to hold that constant. So you raise the subsistence wage, profit goes down, the wage share goes up, and you see. The other thing is, this is the more important thing we want to show. So here's again the marginal product, capital labor ratio. Subsistence wage, some price. Let's start off here. this point. So you have rent, profit. Now what happens as the economy grows? As you move in this direction. So as the economy grows over time, what happens
Goes down.
to profit? Profit's going to decrease, and eventually what will happen to profit? At this point, how much is profit? Zero. What's happened to rents? Rents were here. At this price, how much is rent? At this price, this is profit, and this whole thing is rent. So what happens is over time, rents go up, and profit goes down. So as the economy grows, you bring more and more marginal land into production, more and more marginal resources. That drives rent up, and profit goes down until eventually, in the long run, someday we end up at a point where what happens? There's no more capital accumulation. So this is a stationary state. Up until this point, there's still profit, so there's still capital accumulation. There's still a reason to increase the capital stock. There's still a reason to grow. But here you hit a point where any further growth is negative profit. You're at zero profit, and there's no reason to grow any further. So this is Ricardo's long-run dismal outcome. Everyone's in subsistence, all the laborers, there's no profit, there's no more growth. And you have this distribution of income where you have all these people in subsistence, and then these landowners earning money. And no more growth in the economy at all. How could you avoid that outcome? How could you avoid it? We didn't seem to hit a stationary state yet. Yeah. Well, how would this graph change with innovation? With the same capital labor, would you get more or less output? More. So productivity going up and betting things shifts this line down over time. That's what Ricardo really didn't see, and that gives you a stationary state. As long as you're moving that way, faster than you're moving that way, you'll be okay. And you may even be able to push this line down over time. But someday, according to Ricardo, he didn't see it that. He just, he looks at land and he doesn't realize we're going to be able to make it all as productive as it is today. So he just says, gee, population's growing like a son of a gun. We're bringing all this marginal land in production. It's less productive. Let me put two and two together there. Someday we'll get to land that has no more value. We'll run out of land. When we run out of land, we still think that way. Well, someday we'll run out of Earth. 45 billion people, maybe there's no land left, and that's it.
So is economic growth seen as contributing to income inequality because wages are staying stationary?
Yeah. And particularly it changes the class relationships. It's good for landlords, it's bad for capitalists. Labor is screwed no matter what.
Recessions are good.
Well, yeah. You can have short run periods where wages are above, but mostly he sees just a long run dismal world where population basically overruns productive land. Let's do something you've all done before. I think. So that's one of Ricardo's big contributions, is this theory of rent. It's still with us today. We don't use a labor theory of value fundamentally, but the whole theory of rent is basically right. That they did. So the other big contribution that Ricardo did was what? So on international trade. One of Krugman's papers is Ricardo's big idea. So Ricardo is the one that sort of solved this problem. What fundamental problem does Ricardo solve with this theory of comparative advantage? What was the thinking prior to Ricardo? So what did Smith contribute?
Absolute advantage.
Absolute advantage. So what's absolute advantage? So Smith said, Smith wanted to justify international trade, so he came up with absolute advantage. So here's a case of absolute. So here's England and France, cloth, grain, who's better at growing sheep? England. Who's better at growing grain? France. So if we look at this, these are hours. So these are labor units. England, to produce, I don't know how many there are, 100 cloth or whatever, takes 100 labor units. France takes 150. So who's better at cloth? England. These are hours. Not output. That's the way. I'm using Ricardo's numbers again. And grain, 85, 60. Who's better at grain? France. Because they can produce 100 units in 60 hours, it takes them 85. So who should specialize in what? England has an absolute advantage in cloth. They have an absolute advantage in grain. So they should produce the grain, they should produce the cloth, and they should trade, and everyone will be better off. What's the better off argument? How can you make that really simple? If they move a unit from here to here, how many hours does it cost them for grain? 85? But they can get it for 60 by trading with that. Basically, that's how it works. They can get a unit of cloth, they can get a unit for 100 instead of 150. So by trading, they're going better off. So by specializing and trading, everyone is better off, no one is worse off. But what was the counter argument to that if you were England, or if you were France too? Well, you say, that's fine if they're better than us at something, but we're England. They're not better than us at anything. We're better than them at everything. Why should we trade with them if we're better at producing cloth and better at producing grain? We have an absolute advantage in everything. So why trade? And this is where Ricardo's going to say, look, even when the U.S. is better than Mexico at everything, there's still an advantage to specialization in trade. And so it totally overturned this argument that we still have trouble understanding today, that there's still an advantage to trade with another country, even if you're better at it yourself. So a lawyer has a typist. You've heard of that. So what's an example of, so this is Ricardo. Let's look at comparative advantage. So, oh, now we've got wine and cloth. I don't know why we've got wine, cloth, Portugal, and England. Wine, cloth, Portugal, and England. And these are hours again. 80, So what's Portugal say to themselves before Ricardo? We're better at producing cloth. We're better at producing wine. How can we possibly benefit from trading with you?
I think it's based on the ratios of productivity within each country individually.
Yeah. If they produce a unit of cloth themselves, how many hours is it? This is say for 1 unit. If they produce a unit of cloth themselves, how much does it cost them? 90. Suppose they could produce a unit of wine for 80 and trade it for a unit of cloth. Now they've got it for 80. So if they can somehow trade, they can maybe make it an advantage. How do you decide who should specialize in what? So who should specialize in what here?
Portugal and wine, and England and
Because what's the price of cloth here? 8 nights. So wine costs 8 nights. What's wine cost them? 6/5. So wine's cheaper for them. The price of is 8 nights. Here, go the other way. What's the price of cloth here? It's 5/6. What's the cost here? 9/8. So this is cheaper, relatively cheaper. So Portugal, so we could trade, the trading ratio here is going to be between 8 nights and 6/5. We don't know exactly where because it's bilateral. If you work this out, the trade would be between 8 nights and 6/5. That's the range of possible prices here. Let's make the price 1-to-1. That's within the acceptable range. So let's just imagine that they're going to trade 1-to-1 to understand this. Don't worry about where I got that price. Suppose we trade at 1-to-1 to show there's an advantage. That's all we need to do. So let me just pick a price of 1-to-1. I'm picking it between 8 nights and 6/5. That's how I got it. Let me just pick a price. So at 1-to-1, what could Portugal do? It gets cloth from trade for 80 units of labor. So it can produce one of these at 80 and trade for a cloth. So it's 1-to-1, so it's paying 80 for a cloth. What would it cost otherwise? It would cost 90 to do it themselves. So how much did they save by trading? They've saved 10 hours of labor by trading it 1-to-1. They could produce 2 units. They could produce 1 and 1. How many hours would that take them? 170, right? And all they get is 1 of each. Instead, what they do is they produce 2 of these. How many hours does that take? 160, and then they trade for a cloth. Now they still have 1 wine and 1 cloth, but how many hours do they have to work? 160. If they do it themselves, how many hours do they have to work? 170, so they're better off trading. You're a plumber. Your name's Joe. You live next to Sally the painter. You both need plumbing and painting. What's the most efficient way to do it? The plumber is probably not very good at painting, and the painting is probably not very good at plumbing. So what you could do is have the painter paint both houses. That's probably faster than either person doing it themselves. And have the plumber plumb both houses. So by specializing in trading, those 2 neighbors have more time to play golf or something. Instead of taking Saturday and Sunday, it just takes Saturday when they both do it. They can both do each and a half day individually because they're so fast at it, but if you try to do both yourself, it might take you a whole day or so. So by specializing in trading, even if you're better at both, you can still. How would this work out for England? How would we say the same thing? How are they advantaged here?
Instead of paying 120 for one, they can pay 100 for one.
Right. So they could produce one of each themselves. So there's two ways we could do it. We could have Portugal, we want one cloth, one wine, and we have England, wants one cloth and one wine. One way they could do this is to produce them themselves. If they do it themselves, how much does it cost them in hours? It costs Portugal what? 170? How many hours does it cost them? 220. But what if they trade? How many hours does it take? So it's going to take this one 200 only, and it'll take this one only 160. So both countries save hours. One saves 10 hours, one saves 20 hours, so everyone's better off. So even when you're better at everything, there's still a reason to specialize in trade. Now in this case, when you add in diminishing marginal product and do it right, you don't necessarily get complete specialization. With absolute advantage, you always get complete specialization. You don't always get complete specialization, but you do get that it pays to specialize. And that was a really, really important idea. It's one we still struggle with. And as far as I'm concerned, if you understand this, we're done with Ricardo. And we'll do Jeremy Bentham next time. I'll post a picture of his mummy on the webpage so you can look at it.